Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys all for coming to group session number 2 for the Rare is Scholarship Fund Mentorship Program. We're going to get started. Today's theme is advocating for your needs in school, and we have two speakers who are going to talk about their experiences and resources related to this topic. So here's the agenda, introductions, student speaker, and then presentation from Accessible College. We have a small little activity. You guys can socialize and ask questions if you like, and then we'll wrap up. So once again, here are Stephanie and I's contact information. We're your support team. I was the patient programs intern. I now am just doing this mentorship program as my capstone project. I am here to facilitate this program, help you guys with your mentees and your mentors, and hopefully get a lot out of it. And I don't know, Stephanie, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to thank Naya for all that Naya has done for this program. I know we've heard feedback from a few of you about having great connections with your mentors and mentees. And so we're really excited for this program and session today to learn from a former scholarship recipient and Annie, who you'll meet in a few minutes. But we are currently working on our spring program sessions and want to make sure that they're all helpful for you. So, with this being our very first year, I'm very excited to see what the potential of this program can do. And if you ever have any feedback or ideas, please never hesitate to reach out to us. This program became a thing because we heard from a scholarship recipient the interest and need. So, that's really how we grow our program. So, just want to say thanks for being here. Thanks, Naya, and always recommend you all let us know how we can best support you and offer resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And next, we're going to have our student voice from Gracie. So here's Gracie. Open.
Hi everyone, I'm Gracie Maurer. I am from St. Louis and I currently attend St. Louis University. So I was a Rare Scholarship recipient for my first 3 years of college, so my freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And I wanted to offer you guys a student perspective of navigating accommodations in college, the challenges that came with that, and kind of where I am now through being able to use my voice and learning how to advocate and stick up for myself and the needs that I have. So, a little bit about me, I have ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. They're two inflammatory bowel diseases that severely affect my everyday life, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. And so, my freshman year of college, I went into school and before I went into school, I was told to connect with the Center for Accessibility and Disability. So that is what I did. And my reference person there was Kendra. She's awesome. She met with me before. We talked through everything. She kind of told me these are the different steps that you would have to take to make sure that your accommodations are effective for each course. So I don't know how it works at your guys' colleges, but unfortunately at mine, you can have your letter of accommodation but your accommodations are implemented into each course differently. So you actually have to meet with each professor for each course and talk with them and have a meeting with them of how your accommodations are going to be implemented in that course. So a very challenging thing. And when you think about you have each semester you have different courses, and so I have about 5 courses, 5 to 6 courses each semester. And so for me, it really felt like, wow, this is more of a hindrance than actually being able to help me. I felt like this is a really long process. I had to set up meetings with each of these professors, find a time that fit with our schedules, sit down and talk with them. And although I'm protected by HIPAA to not have to explain my story, piece of advice I would give is that I think it does help a lot of professors if you can be vulnerable with them and tell them your story in a way and share your story as much as you feel comfortable and talk about how these accommodations actually help you to be successful in school. And so I met with my professors before school even started, talked with them about accommodations and how they would be implemented in the courses. And then I was told that I have to fill out DocuSign forms for each class, and there was 4 forms for each class. I have to fill them out and sign them. Then my professors have to fill them out and sign them, and then the Center for Accessibility has to also look at those and sign them as well. So a very long process. And when you're a college student who's also working and you have a lot going on, I felt like that was a very challenging process when I feel like I'm already going through a lot of challenging things myself. And so my advice with that aspect is talk to your Center for Accessibility and Disability. And if you don't have one at your school, talk to your president at the university about actually having one of those centers, and who is your reference person if you were to need help or you need to talk to someone. And so getting those things done on the front end of things, because if you have that 504 plan, which you are legally obligated to have, that 504 plan actually protects you throughout the duration of your studies. And so that 504 plan will list those accommodations that are needed, and then you are legally entitled to those accommodations, and your professors have to adhere to those, and your university has to adhere to those. And if they don't, that does become a bigger legal issue of I am entitled to these things, and I need these things to be successful. And so how are we going to find a way to implement these things so that I can be most successful at your university? And so I navigated my freshman year. I started. And I came in, and unfortunately, I got put into a dorm that was mold infested. I got very, very sick. I was in and out of the hospital for about 6 to 12 weeks of that first semester. I told the university that I think there's mold in my room. The people at the hospital think there's mold in my room. They told me there's no mold in your room. We'll come clean out your air filter. It might just be that. They cleaned out the air filter. There was stuff all over the ground. Clearly, it was mold. I continued to get sick, and eventually I had to go home because I was so sick, and they didn't have another place to house me. And so that is when I decided to do a mold test of my own in my room. Bought it for like $10 on Amazon, but I knew that I had to find a way to mend this issue, and I had been advocating for myself, and it clearly wasn't working. And so I did a mold test in my room, and within 24 hours, it started to grow. I let it grow for a few more days and sent the housing department pictures and copied the Center for Accessibility and Disability on the email. Um, Immediately when I sent that, all of the sudden, I can get switched into a different dorm. So they mended that and tried to switch me into a different dorm. But if most of you don't know, mold toxicity takes twice as long to get out of your system as it was in your system. So it was in my system for about 6 months. And it took my body about a whole year to recover from. And so that fight with the housing department was very challenging. But the one thing I would say with that is don't be afraid to speak out when you know that this is making you sick, because you are entitled to a safe place to live, a safe place to be housed with a bathroom if you need that, or your own private room if you need that. And the university uh, can work with you, and they should work with you. And that you might run into challenges with that. But again, speaking up for yourself and advocating for yourself is so, so important to provide yourself the environment that is going to best help you be successful and the healthiest self you can be. Um, and so after navigating that, I began navigating some challenges with professors in college, and a professor who was not willing to acknowledge my accommodations said that she thinks that if I'm offered something, that it has to be offered to everyone because that's equality. And so I ran into a really big issue with her, and had to have multiple meetings with her to try to mend the situation first. And then I actually brought in the Center for Accessibility and Disability, and asked for one of their people to come in on my behalf and sit in on one of those meetings to hopefully help mend this situation and find the best solution. And so she came into the meeting, sat down with me. We had to bring in the dean of students, because this professor was still not able to acknowledge the need for my accommodations in this course. And after bringing in the Dean of Students and Kendra from the Center of Accessibility and Disability, we finally reached a consensus of how my accommodations would be implemented into this course. And that didn't happen until about week 8 of my semester. So that was a very challenging thing to navigate. A professor that I had had previously who also gave me issues. The biggest thing that I learned is just resilience. I think resilience and advocating for yourself and your needs, and not giving up when you're told no for something that you are legally protected by, but also something that you need to best be successful. And so hopefully sharing these different things can help you know kind of how to navigate those situations better, or those conversations. And my best piece of advice would be to do those things on the front end of your semesters and meet with professors and share your story in a way you feel comfortable, and talk to them about how they can best help you be successful in this course. And yeah, that would be my advice, is to really try to focus on implementing these things before the semester begins, because once the semester begins, I know you all know it becomes pretty crazy. And that's the last thing you need is somebody who's questioning the things that help you best be successful. And so yeah, that would be my advice, be to do things on the front end of things, and keep that resilience of advocating for yourself and your needs.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gracie. Does anyone have any questions for Gracie? Okay, no worries. I just wanted to show that out there. Next, we are going to our guest presenter, Annie from Accessible College, and she has a presentation right here that we can start. Let me pin her.
Yay. Pin me. Hey everybody. I'm Annie. It's great to be here, and I want to just take a minute to thank Gracie for sharing that experience. I think that while it sounded like it was fraught in many ways, there were also some great takeaways about like communication, self-advocacy, and connecting that I think are really transferable for a lot of people, and also a place where a lot of us struggle. So those are some skills I think that as students are transitioning from high school to college, that a lot of us don't have a ton of experience in and don't have a lot of practice in that self-advocacy piece. And so that is often a challenge for a lot of students. You can go to the next slide. And as we're diving into this, oh, and I see my slides got a little wonky, probably PowerPoint, probably Google Doc to PowerPoint. There's a message for everybody. Whenever you do that, double check that your Google Doc slides go into your PowerPoint slides correctly. So let that be a lesson for all of you. But just a little bit about me, and I should say too, I am a person who has just run-of-the-mill chronic health conditions. So I have osteoarthritis. I'm actually having a hip replacement in a week and a half, and just regular old autoimmune disorders, and other chronic health conditions as well. But that's a lens that I bring to my work because I often, have pain or deal with flare-ups too. Um, so my professional background, I have a background in special education and secondary education. I got into this work, transition support for students with physical disabilities, so wheelchair users, mobility device users, and students with chronic health conditions. So I have lots of clients who have rare diseases and, Crohn's, colitis, diabetes, epilepsy, POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, autoimmune disorders, the whole spectrum of conditions. I got into this work because I used to be the associate director of the Disability Support Office at Georgetown. I was the associate director for about 6 years, supporting specifically students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions, undergraduate, graduate, and medical school students. And one of the things that kept emerging for me as an educator was that, wow, these students in particular don't have a lot of guidance or support prior to coming to college. There's a lot of resources for students with learning disabilities, ADD, and autism spectrum disorders, but nothing really for students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions. And so that's why I started Accessible College. And I primarily work with students who are in high school, though not exclusively. I often work with students who are currently in college who are sort of reevaluating or assessing the accommodations that they have. But as I'm working with high school students, a lot of the things that we're doing are thinking about what are their needs holistically. So the types of accommodations they might need, academic, residential, dining, transportation, the whole shebang. And then thinking about how are they connecting with disability support offices prior to applying to schools, factoring that into their overall consideration. And then thinking about continuity of care, and thinking about how are they getting their meds? How are they managing their livelihoods? Do they need personal care attendants? Do they need other supports, independent living, that kind of stuff? You can go ahead to the next slide. And as you're doing that, I just want to say there's a couple things that Gracie pointed out that I want to just make sure to highlight. So every college has a disability support office. There's 4,500 colleges in the United States. Every single one has a disability support office. They all have different names: Accessibility Services, Student Disability Services, Disability Resource Center. They all have different names. So students don't have to worry about whether or not that office exists. I think the difference is that all of those offices operate a little bit differently. Each college has their own documentation guidelines for receiving accommodations. They all have their own process for receiving accommodations. So a lot of schools have gone to like content management systems where you can get approved for your accommodations and then your professors get emailed an accommodation letter. Back when I worked at Georgetown, we had triplicate forms that I would sign with the student would sign it, the professor would sign it, and everybody would get a copy. Some schools still have those forms. And other schools just have different processes for accommodation letters. And I should say too that in college, they're called accommodation letters. And while the law that governs accommodations in college is partially Section 504, those aren't 504 plans because 504 plans are a high school thing, a K through 12 thing. And that segues pretty well into this legal stuff. And I noted that when we were talking, a lot of you are going into like healthcare related fields, which I always think is not uncommon for people with chronic health conditions too, who've had a lot of experience in their personal experience, and then bringing that to the healthcare industry, which I think is incredibly important. And it makes me happy to know that many of you are going into health related fields. But this stuff is the things that you should be aware of, right? So as you're working with other individuals or as you're mentoring people, these are sort of some key laws and things that are important. So IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's the law that governs special ed services and supports for students with disabilities in public K through 12 schools. So it doesn't apply to private schools. Um, the thing about IDEA is that that is the law that gives us IEPs, individualized education programs. Some of you might have had an IEP sometime in your educational career if you were in a public school. The thing about IEPs is that they cover both accommodations for students and services. So if you had like occupational therapy or physical therapy or speech therapy or orientation and mobility, that's part of an IEP plan, a service, or a one-on-one aid. That's part of an IEP. Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, applies to K through 12 private schools and colleges. So some of you might have had a 504 plan in a public high school or in a private high school. Your private high school might have called it a learning plan or an accommodation plan, but functionally it's the same thing. So 504 is an anti-discrimination law. So it says that students with disabilities cannot be discriminated against. So 504 plan provides accommodations for the student to be able to gain access to education. The law that becomes much bigger in the college setting is the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the ADA provides for, and here's the air quotes, reasonable accommodations. And this is where sometimes the rubber meets the road in terms of thinking about what is reasonable within the classroom setting that the student is in, or thinking about the program that the student is in, or the physical space of that institution. If you're a wheelchair user, a mobility device user, sometimes the guidance is really just about reducing barriers to access. So that might mean like moving a classroom as opposed to making a building accessible for someone. And so this becomes a little bit different in the college setting, right? So what Gracie had mentioned about like connecting with each individual professor, that's the case for students across the country at any institution because each course looks a little bit different, right? So it's a pain in the butt, let's all be honest. But meeting with those professors to go through the syllabus to say how many absences would be too many absences, or how much of an extension can I have on these assignments if I have a flare up and I need to complete something. That is tricky, I think, for a lot of people to engage in those conversations, and there's an uncomfortable power dynamic which exists. And sometimes there is pushback from faculty. But ideally, students have connected with the disability support offices and vetted them prior to committing to the school. And so they know what sort of support they might get from those folks. That's the ideal situation, right? So that you have somebody who's on your side and on your team to help you advocate. FERPA is the other one that comes up, usually surprises parents the most, and sometimes students, because when you go to college, your guardians no longer have access to your grades, your educational record, any of those pieces. So you can sign a FERPA waiver with your parents if or your guardians if you want them to have access to those pieces. But that also means like your guardians who may have had a bigger role when you were in high school no longer have that role of reaching out and connecting with the school, advocating on your behalf. It's all on the student, right? So that's a big shift as well for students and for parents too. Go on and go to the next slide. Um, ADA, just circling back to this, defines a disability as a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So the question is, how does your condition or conditions impact you? What are the functional limitations that you experience, like fatigue, dizziness, other things, brain fog that you experience because of that condition? You can go to the next slide. Just some facts for you guys, because I always think this is really fascinating. And I think that oftentimes students feel really alone. And the reality is that 21% of undergraduate students report having a disability. 1 in 4 adults in the United States has a disability. This means that number right there, those are the students, the 21% are the students who go to the disability support office, follow the process, and get approved for accommodations. So there's probably a whole nother group of students who has a disability, but either hasn't gone, for whatever reason, hasn't gone through the process. They don't have the documentation. They aren't aware that they could request accommodations. There's too much stigma, whatever those reasons are. But even so, that 21% means that students with disabilities on any given college campus are the largest marginalized population on any campus, right? So there are more people with disabilities than a lot of times we think there are. And the types of disabilities really vary. So the largest group of students who are requesting accommodations are students with learning disabilities. So that might be like dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADD, followed by mental health conditions. Students with chronic health conditions, sensory impairments, physical disabilities are a much smaller part of that whole student group, but that's still a huge number of people. So 6% of college students have a physical disability or a mobility impairment. And the data comes from a Government Accountability Office report that came out in 2024, which pulls from national education data. The thing about college disability data is that usually most colleges only rank a primary condition. You might have a primary disability and then a secondary disability. Most of us, maybe many of us on this call, have multiple conditions, right? So the data is not perfect, but it does tell us that there are a lot of students with disabilities who are on college campuses. You can go to the next slide. So this just has a chart from that report. So if you see down in 2004, it was actually 11% of students who had disabilities on college campuses from that data of the students who had gone and gotten accommodations. Now we're up to 21% in 2020, but it shows you behavioral and emotional, that includes learning disabilities and mental health conditions. And then we have physical, sensory, developmental disabilities, which might be intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then other disabilities is sort of the catch-all pot that is a lot of students who probably have chronic health conditions too. And so it just sort of shows you the numbers and the range of students. You can go to the next slide. Just a little brief thing, and most of you experienced this in your life, so I'm just sharing it to say like these are the differences between high school and college. College, you have to go and connect with the disability office to request accommodations to go through that process. The student has to self-advocate and arrange their own accommodations. Some of that might have been done for you in high school. And then you have to connect with your professors, which is another piece of the puzzle, very different from high school. So there's a huge shift that happens. And for many of us, it's like a cliff, right? You're just like thrown right into the fire without really knowing that you're going to have to be doing all of these things. And so that can be really challenging. Go to the next slide. The documentation, we talked about this just a minute ago briefly, but it varies. Every college has their own documentation guidelines. Same with med schools. When we're talking about healthcare industry stuff too, we also have to be thinking about the technical standards for that program, right? So like, can you meet the technical standards with your physical ability? That's a question that often comes up. There might be accommodations that can address that. And there's a really great resource called Docs with Disabilities. And I'll throw that in the chat. I'm jotting it down so I don't forget. I'll throw that in the chat for those of you who are going into healthcare related fields. It's a really excellent resource. But in general, for any student who is going into a college program, if you want to get accommodations, you will have to provide documentation. So for learning disabilities, it's usually a neuropsych evaluation that was done. Oh, thanks, Stephanie did it for me. That is done within the last 3 to 5 years. Different colleges have different requirements for that. Mental health conditions, it might be a psychological evaluation or a letter from your therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist. But for most of us on this call, we're thinking about a letter from our healthcare provider, like your neurologist or your general provider, that outlines what your diagnosis is or diagnoses, outlines your functional limitations, so what you experience because of that, and recommendations for accommodations. And this is where healthcare providers sometimes don't know what is a reasonable accommodation in the college setting. So I actually spend a lot of time with students determining what would be reasonable for college so that then they can bring those letters to their healthcare providers. So it's more comprehensive and makes more sense because then when the people in the disability support office are reading it, they can see the one-to-one functional limitation, reason for accommodation, which is really what they're often looking for. But you need to contact your college to figure out what sort of documentation that you need. Go ahead to the next slide. Supplementary documentation. So this is stuff that most colleges don't accept as primary source documentation, but it's still good for them to see. Might be your IEP, might be your 504 plan, might be your letter from your high school that outlines your accommodations, SAT, ACT accommodations, which, by the way, if you're taking like more advanced exams to get into like the GRE or like a law school exam, having a documentation, a history of exam accommodations is really helpful for those things. So just sort of like squirrel all these pieces away so that you have them for future you. So those are good things for the Disability Support Office to have. Go on to the next slide. And then just like general accommodation considerations, I think for most high school students, and you may have experienced this yourself, like you're not really thinking about the whole process of going to college holistically and the accommodations pieces. Um, there's academic accommodations like extra time, like classroom relocation or priority registration that you might need because of your condition. But the residential pieces are ones that often catch people by surprise. So housing accommodations, as you all know, usually are due first before before any other accommodations, and it might be like an accessible room or a room with an ensuite bathroom or on a lower floor or whatever, or having a personal care attendant who's able to access your room or living with you in your room. But accommodations don't just stop there. You can also ask for stuff related to recreation, to dining, to other programmatic, so events on campus, anything that anybody has access to, that the general student population has access to. If you need an accommodation to be able to attend those events, you should be able to ask for those accommodations. So sometimes it's a good idea to have pre-conversations with disability support offices to make sure that they are equipped to process those and have things in place so that you can get what you need. Go ahead to the next slide. So this just has I have my QR code and I popped it in the chat here too, so you can like click on the link to go to my resource sheet. But I provide physical disability and health condition college planning. So I work with students one-on-one and families to talk about the accommodation needs, the questions for disability offices, considerations for independent living, how to request accommodations, how to communicate with university administrators, how to manage all of these pieces. I also have a partnership with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. So students with any type of limb paralysis, which is a big tent term, can work with me for free through the Reeve Foundation for a few hours. And limb paralysis in sort of Reeves' way of thinking about it could be things like muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, students who've had a stroke, students who have any type of paralysis related to their condition would qualify for that. So if you're mentoring people or if you know other people in your community or if you're thinking about, if you need some help now and you have a form of limb paralysis and you want to work with me, you can do that through the Reeve Foundation. Go to the next slide. I also have online courses. Yeah, I can see the little Google Drive to PowerPoint snafu. But the online courses that I have are really great for educators, for parents, for healthcare providers. I have one on preparing students with physical disabilities and health conditions for college, and then I have one on dorm life and daily routines, about physical disabilities and college independence. They both have CEUs attached to them, continuing education credits for occupational therapists and for social workers. They're online and self-paced, so they're a really good way to sort of learn about these pieces. You can go to the next slide, and then I'm almost done. Let's see.
Oops.
Oh, perfect. Wait, we had it and then it went away. But
Oh,
anyway, it has my contact information too. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm at accessiblecollege.com. And the QR code is there. So on that info sheet, you'll find a ton of resources. I wrote a guide on navigating the transition to college with paralysis for the Reeve Foundation, and I have all of my muscular dystrophy resources. And there's also a bunch of health condition resources there as well. There is like advocacy, or there has been in least the last 5 years, to allow colleges to accept IEPs as source documentation. I forget what it's called, the RAISE Act, maybe. But so like, th this is a thing that people are talking about. And I would encourage everybody here too, if you're not involved in your student government organizations or with disability groups on campus too, to like become involved, because everything you're experiencing, somebody else is experiencing it too and wants to change it. And students have a much bigger voice than sometimes I think they realize. So that would be an important thing if you want to make these changes, to get engaged in making these changes. So, and you can look, Emma, you can look at AHEAD, the Association of Higher Education and Disability. That's like the group that all of the disability support offices are a part of. They have very open recommendations for documentation, although, schools can still choose to create their own documentation guidelines. So they provide guidance, but not everybody follows that guidance. Are there other questions? Oh, RISE Act there. RISE, raise. I was close.
I had never heard of that before. I think that's a phenomenal bill. Thank you for pointing that out. I wonder if we could tie that into any of our advocacy efforts. As I could tell from this group, it's definitely a very important topic and conversation. So I very appreciate everybody's engagement and Annie, you taking the time to go over so many details and so many things that our scholarship recipients talk about all the time. It's very important and thank you all for being so engaged in this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. So we had an activity. We're running a little over on time, but if you guys want to take this home for homework or just think about it over the weekend, I'd encourage you to find your school's disability, accessibility, whatever they call it, office, and make sure you know where it is, who you can contact as soon as you can, because like Gracie was saying, it's good to know. I know we're already all in school, but just knowing who you can talk to before a big event or anything might happen is great to know. And then if you can find one student organization, club, or any resource that you can just have in the back of your mind ready to go um, at your school or maybe just even in your community, that would be great to look up and just have in your back burner. Basically, what we learned today, just have these things. Accessible College could be one of those, like that could be your resource as well. So take a look at these. Think about that over the weekend. We won't have you drop it in the chat now, but this is what we were going to have as our activity. And then our LinkedIn group. We have our LinkedIn group. We've been seeing, I posted a few opportunities, Stephanie did as well, but we noticed that the default is for LinkedIn to put it on no notifications. So if you go to LinkedIn and then go to your groups and select the community scholarships group and then click the bell icon to make sure that you get our notifications for when people post, then you'll be able to engage more. Because I put a couple internships in there that I saw that I thought people might be interested in. I know Stephanie put an opportunity in there. And if you guys see anything you'd like to share with the other people in the group, that'd be great. We've got to make sure people know about it so they can hear about it. And if you haven't joined, you can use this QR code to join. And then we have set our upcoming meetings for the spring semester. So we'll have two more sessions next semester, one about building awareness and advocacy opportunities right before Rare Disease Week, and then navigating health insurance as a university student at the end of April. So those are our two upcoming meetings. We'll have some good resources and information there.